Hello there. My name is Mrs. Mary DePaul, and I am the librarian at Fort Washington Elementary School in Upper Dublin School District. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you an amazing read aloud. It is entitled Molly Bannaky, and it is one of my favorite read alouds for fifth grade. It is a picture book. However, it is for older students. It definitely is for older students. I always like to read it during February for African American History Month. And without further ado, here it is. Molly Banneky. Written by Alice McGill. Pictures by Chris K. Sopete. The dedication page is included right on the title page in this book, right here. And the dedication is for my husband, Marion Gibb McGill, and my daughters, Gwendolyn and Paulette, A.M. I dedicate this book to all the teachers in the world for their tireless and compassionate efforts to educate our future. And I just want to thank Houghton Mifflin Company for allowing teachers and librarians like me all over the world permission to read their books. Molly Banneky. On a cold gray morning in 1683, Molly Walsh sat on a stool tugging at the udder of an obstinate cow. She was a dairy maid, and it was her duty to get up every morning around 5 o'clock and go to that same shed and milk that same cow. The man who had owned the cow owned the cottage where she lived, the manor house, and all the land around. He was Lord. Molly kept tugging. The milk squirted into the pail. When the pail was full, it was her duty to take it up the hill to the manor house and hand it to the scullery maid, who handed it to the kitchen maid, who handed it to the cook. The jittery cow kept hooking his head. The week before, the cow kicked over her pail of milk. The cook had warned Molly the week before that she would be brought before the court if ever again she stole the lordship's milk. That was the law. Molly's shawl was thin. Her hands were very cold. But at last the pail was full to the frothy brim. Suddenly, Molly sneezed. The cow jumped, the pail tipped over, and the milk seeped into the damp ground. Before the sun set that day, Molly stood before the court. The usual penalty was death on the gallows, but no one who could read the Bible could be executed for stealing. So a Bible was offered to her. That too was the law. Molly's voice rang out clear and true. Her life was spared, but the justice sentenced Molly to serve 7 years of bondage, to be served in a colony across the ocean. Having no family, Molly Walsh, age 17, said goodbye to England and boarded a ship. After she landed in the New World, Molly worked for a planter on the eastern shore of Maryland. There, the cannons fired at daybreak, calling the servants to work. Molly tended her master's tobacco crops, pressing the tiny brown seeds into the earth and picking the worms from the flowering stalks. Her calloused hands grew strong, strong enough to control a team of oxen and to plow steady. In her spare time, Molly sewed and nursed the sick for pay. After working for the planter for 7 years, Molly was free to go. As the law required, the farmer gave her an ox hitched to a cart, a plow, 2 hoes, a bag of tobacco seeds, a bag of corn, clothing, and a gun. Acres and acres of fertile land stretched ahead of her. Just before sunset that same day, Molly left the road and went 4 miles into the wilderness, where she staked her claim. That a lone woman should stake land was unheard of, but Molly's new neighbors saw the way she jutted out her chin. They helped her build a 1-room cabin. They helped her harvest and cure her first crop. They helped her cart the tobacco to the warehouse to sell, but Molly soon realized that the farm was too much for her to manage alone. One day, Molly read a posted announcement that a ship would be landing soon. Because she needed help in working her land, she decided to watch the docking of the ship, a slave ship. She watched the men of Africa file by, one after the other. She saw the misery and shame on their faces as they were forced to mount the auction block. Molly noticed a tall, regal man who dared to look into the eyes of every bidder. Molly bought him and vowed, when his time was up, to set him free. Molly talked to the man, using her hands and arms to tell him of her homeland and of her years as an indentured servant. He smiled at this strange-looking woman with sweet grass eyes and straw hair and the skin the color of the underside of a melon. He told her his name, Bannaky. Because he was not used to the climate, he was often sick with chills and fever. Still, Banneker would walk up and down the rows of tobacco, stopping to turn each leaf on a stalk as if reading a printed page. He showed Molly how to dig ditches, to guide streams of water down the furrows. As the tobacco ripened in the fields, Molly and Bannaky grew to love each other. She signed his freedom papers, and a traveling minister performed their marriage rites. Though Molly had broken colonial law by marrying a black man, her neighbors came to accept this marriage and to respect Bannaky. In times of drought, he shared his knowledge of irrigation and crop rotation. He learned at an early age in his native country. Years passed. Molly and Bannaky had 4 young daughters, a large house, and many outbuildings overlooked their 100 acres of land. Suddenly, a great sadness struck the family. Bannaky died, and Molly was alone again. She drew her daughters closer to her and taught them how to work the land. In time, she had a grandson, born of her eldest daughter, Mary, and her husband, Robert. In her Bible, Molly wrote her new grandson's name, Benjamin Banneker. She taught this young boy how to read and to write. She told him about his grandfather, a prince who was the son of a king in Africa, and about her days as a dairymaid across the ocean in England. Now, children and families, I'm going to read the nonfiction part, even though that was a nonfiction account of the story of Molly Bannaky in time. She was to be the grandmother of the great man Benjamin Banneker. And I'm going to read a little bit about the time in history right now. And this is from the back portion of the book. In the late 17th century, many people from England chose to leave the hunger and poverty of their country. They became servants in the American colonies, where laborers were desperately needed. In exchange for sea passage, indentured servants agreed to work for 7 years, after which time they were declared free. Some, such as Molly Walsh, became indentured servants when they were exiled from England by law. Molly herself escaped death on the gallows through a loophole. She could read the Bible, and so her life was spared. It was the responsibility of the court to supply the Bible, as many poor people did not own them. Many years later, after she became a free woman, Molly purchased a Bible from England. After a grueling 2-month voyage below the decks of a ship, where crowded and unsanitary conditions often led to disease, the 7-year passengers were sold to owners who were required to provide them with food, shelter, and clothing. At the end of their term, bonded servants were given, quote, all that was needed to start again on their own, end quote. Often they moved farther west and staked claims. Settlers could pay for the land after their first crop was sold. African slaves had no such options. They were treated as property for the duration of their lives. Under their laws, colonists could be forced into slavery for marrying a slave. Though Molly Banneky was not prosecuted for this crime, Molly also feared retribution from disapproving neighbors. Bannaky never converted to Christianity, and as the nearest church was in Baltimore, it is thought that a traveling minister married them privately. Because Bannaky was free, their 4 children were born. Their eldest daughter, Mary, also married an African slave named Robert. When Robert became a baptized Christian, the planter who owned him set him free. Free to marry, free to own land, free to come and go as he pleased. Having no last name, Robert took his wife's name, Bannaky. By the time their first son was born, the spelling of their name had changed to Banneker. Taught to read from his father's cherished Bible, Benjamin Banneker. He was born in 1731 and he died in 1806. Benjamin Banneker went on to become a very highly regarded scientist and mathematician. He taught himself astronomy and surveying, and he was appointed to the Federal Survey Commission that planned Washington, D.C. Benjamin Banneker was also known for calculating Hemerides tables that used the locations of the sun, moon, and stars to measure time. From the year 1792 to 1802, he published an almanac, the first by a Black man, featuring these astronomical tables as well as scientific essays. Benjamin Banneker wanted to disprove the popular belief that Blacks were inferior to whites in intelligence. In 1791, he wrote to the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, concerning the injustice of slavery, enclosing one of his almanacs. Jefferson answered, agreeing with Benjamin Banneker, and sent a copy of the almanac to the Academy of Sciences in Paris. That almanac, which is in Paris today, resides there today. And this is a wonderful read aloud for some older children, maybe fourth and fifth grade. I hope you enjoyed the story of Mary Walsh and her journey in life. And if you're interested, Benjamin Banneker is an amazing African American. It's fun to look things up and even find some old primary documents regarding some of his writings, especially his plan of Washington, D.C., and his almanacs. Thanks for listening today. And remember, keep reading. Bye now.